Hello and welcome to With Faith in Mind. I'm Dan Hummel, today's host and the Director of University Engagement at Upper House. This episode is part of our series on Christian education at the Crossroads, and we're welcoming Tiffany Malloy to the podcast. Hi, Tiffany.
Hi, how are you?
Doing well.
Good.
Excited for our conversation.
Me too.
A little about Tiffany. She is the pastor of spiritual formation at Blackhawk Church, which is actually where I go. It's also where my wife works, full disclosure, at the front end. Also about Tiffany, before she was the pastor of spiritual formation, she played a number of other roles at Blackhawk Church, including as an associate pastor at the downtown site of Blackhawk in Madison. And she has a Bachelor's of Science in Education from the University of Missouri, Columbia, and an MA in Christian Leadership from Asbury Theological Seminary. Tiffany, are you from Missouri?
I am from Illinois.
Okay.
Just a small town right outside St. Louis.
Okay. What drew you to University of Missouri?
Yeah, well, I had narrowed it down to 3 schools, and that was my closest school. And so when I visited the campus, it was kind of my fallback school. I wasn't really quite sure I wanted to go to a state school, and I fell in love with the campus. And so that's
So you went there. Awesome.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, before jumping in on our topic today, which is going to be about Christian education in the church, Tiffany, I know you a little bit personally. One thing I know about you is you are a voracious reader. You read a lot of books.
Love to read.
So is there a story behind that? Have you always been a reader? Is there a particular reason you like reading so much?
Totally. Always. I remember when I was little, I shared a room with my older sister who was 7 years older than I was. And she was wonderful and loud and messy and took up a lot of space. And so I remember I was very introverted. And so to get away from the loudness and the chaos, I would go into our shared closet where there was a light and I would put pillows all around and I would just read for hours. And so I think maybe it began as a way to kind of escape the good chaos of our shared life together. But I have found just such fun in both fiction and nonfiction. Growing up, definitely fiction. And then once I hit high school, I moved to nonfiction. And recently, as a 40-year-old, have moved back into reading fiction. So I think it's just a great way there's so many lives to live. And so we only get one, but by reading, I think we get to live a lot of different lives. So.
Yeah. Is there a particular genre that you enjoy a lot?
Oh, I mean, maybe I do read a lot of, right now, nonfiction. And so leadership nonfiction or, Christian theology, different things. So maybe that's super nerdy.
Pretty typical pastor.
Yes, but I
there,
do love like Reese Witherspoon's fiction book of the month. So that's where I go for pleasure. So
very cool. Mm-hmm. Well, I think we'll talk a little about later on the role of at least being a lifelong learner in spiritual formation. So jumping in, I thought it would be helpful to just get a sense of what brought you into this line of work.
Yeah.
So basically, how did you find your way into the vocation of a pastor, and particularly a pastor of spiritual formation?
Right. What an unusual place that I'm in. I think if you would have told my 10-year-old self that this is where I would be, they wouldn't know what to do with that. So I didn't really grow up in the church, became a Christ follower in middle school. But pretty soon, right, I began to just be so fascinated by Christians' relationship with the Bible. I thought it was interesting, like that they read it every day and that every Sunday we were opening it and teaching out of it. And it just seemed like the sacred book. And so began reading it myself and then wondered what other people thought of it. So I began a kind of a Bible study, which I didn't really know that's what it was. But in my high school, inviting other Christians from other churches who I wanted to hear what they thought of it, right? And so did that. I think I was so interested in how people grow and how people are formed from the very beginning. Went to campus, went to college, was a part of a campus ministry again, really enjoyed that experience, meeting with younger students, learning about how their culture and how their family and how their church background has kind of influenced where they are and what questions they were wrestling with. Loved it so much. I went on staff at a campus ministry for a few years. And again, where I think that's where God was continuing to grow, that my love for environments of growth and what does it take for somebody to be open to what God has for them in their lives.
Did you feel a particular calling to college students, or?
I mean, I thought so.
Age?
I think it's because that's who I was, and that's where I was at. And so I had thought, maybe I'll be, a college pastor. Well, not a pastor, because that wasn't in the denomination that was a part of. That wasn't really an option. So I didn't really maybe know what I wanted, but I did begin to sense that maybe God had something like that in mind. And so I ended up going to Asbury Theological Seminary, again, where I love the Bible, but I felt like, you know what, I do love the Bible, and I think that my natural learning can take me far in that, kind of on my own or reading different things. But I had experienced all throughout college, just maybe some leaders in my life who were making what I thought were kind of poor leadership decisions, and I could see how it was impacting the growth or not growth of the people in our communities. And so when I went to seminary, I thought, I need to learn how organizations work, how systems work, how all these things work, so that I can make better choices. Because the leaders in kind of our community they were making these decisions out of really good intent. I think they were really doing the best they had with the knowledge that they had, but I just don't think they really had taken the time to understand how organizations work and some of the kind of leadership parts of it. So that's why I ended up studying, and came out of that. By the time I graduated, I had 3 kids under the age of 4. And so I ended up staying at home for a while while my husband did grad school. Then we ended up moving here to Madison. My husband was studying at the university, education policy. And as soon as my kids, most of them were in school, I felt like, okay, Lord, this is time. What are we going to do? And so there was a job opening at Blackhawk, and I thought, well, I've never, this was my church and we were a part of it, but, we had always been a part of kind of small churches and campus ministries. And so I wondered, I don't know, what would it be like to work at a church? So I was, my first job was on the spiritual formation team, and then had a variety of roles like you had mentioned.
When you joined on that team, did you understand did you understand what spiritual formation was? I think that's
absolutely not.
Okay, because that's a term I think that has it's a churchy phrase. Yeah. What was that like, sort of entering into this particular way of thinking about spirituality and education and all that?
Yeah. Well, I think it was a word that was kind of newer actually at the time as well, because I think traditionally maybe I thought of it as discipleship, and I think that's what many people, even in our congregation, had considered that's the word that you use. And so I remember when I first came on the team, the pastor of spiritual formation at that time, would sometimes share with me like, some people are a little uncertain about the use of this term. They don't understand it either. So he spent emails and conversations over coffee explaining, no, this is another word for discipleship, and it's about our growth. And so I did have context for that. So I did have context for kind of the Christian education world, is maybe what it had been called in some of the churches that I was a part of in college and youth group. And so I did have a context for that. And that's always been my heart, is I do want people, obviously, to come to know Jesus, but often I feel like God has used me in a process of, after they've come to know Jesus, to begin to develop them in their relationship with God.
And that even the word discipleship, that might be a churchy word too, in some sense. So what's entailed by that? So I can imagine someone who's unfamiliar with that term, or maybe it's used differently in different traditions, might think of like some type of mentor relationship is the key to making disciples.
Yes.
Jesus had disciples. Maybe I need to, or it's like around certain disciplines, a related word. It's where maybe in a legalistic sense, these are the things you do to be a good Christian type thing.
Yeah.
So when you're using the word, either discipleship or spiritual formation, what's the elevator pitch for what that is?
Yeah. I mean, I kind of say it's learning to walk with God in our daily lives. And so I think there's different forms that discipleship can take, and that different people are, like you had mentioned, are familiar with. I grew up in a campus ministry. One-to-one discipleship that's how you were discipled. That's how you grew. That's other people kind of focus on maybe a Sunday school experience where there's an expert or a teacher in the room and you're listening and you're having conversations and digesting the material. But I really do think it's how are you becoming more and more formed into the image of Christ? And I would say more and more into the image of who God created you to be. So I don't think we're all supposed to look cookie cutter in the exact same way, but it's all contextualized into how we're wired and what culture we grew up in and the giftings that God has gifted us with. And so, I would say that's my...
Yeah. And I think, and maybe this is something that's come up in a few of our conversations around education, is there's an assumption that education is really a head thing, right? Like it's like intaking information and learning new facts and ways to interpret things. But as I've understood spiritual formation, it's trying to be, I guess the word is holistic or something. Yeah. It's thinking of, heart, mind, soul, strength all together. Is that how you think about it too?
Absolutely. And, I would say that oftentimes, I would say even in my limited church experience, having really not really entered the church world until middle school or high school, I have experienced this idea maybe that even Christian education or spiritual discipleship is head-based. Mm-hmm. Like if you know something, then that means your life will be different. And so I do like the nuances maybe of the spiritual formation movement where, there is this author, his name is John Mark Comer, and he talks about how spiritual formation is less like learning math and more like learning karate, right? Mm. So it's the idea that it takes both knowledge and practice to really know something. And so I think that, spiritual formation is more than just belief, but that belief is a huge part of shaping our desires and our practices and how we kind of show up in the world around us.
Right. Yeah. So we didn't actually finish your story. I cut you off when you had joined Blackhawk.
Oh, yes.
But you weren't yet the pastor of spiritual formation.
Right.
So what was it like to sort of become the head of the ship of that
I
part
know.
of the
That was
church?
fun because, maybe I didn't say this before, but my first role on team was an assistant role. And so I remember just, kind of being like, I don't know if I have time to even work outside the home, as my kids were all little and stuff. And so I was able to watch the team, to watch my boss at the time, who was the pastor of spiritual formation, to make decisions, to figure out how he's talking about it. And I think it was such a gift to me to be able to see somebody else do it before I stepped in. But I, like you had said, after being on that team, I went downtown and was associate pastor downtown. And I began to help people to figure out how to live this out. So my job here, I spent so much time with our congregation over coffees talking about where they were getting stuck in their relationship with God, how they could discover their gifts, how they could be a part of the life of the body in different ways. And so I think even though I was on a different team, I was doing a lot of the implementing of it, helping to see what the decisions that team was making, how it was showing up in the daily lives of our congregation and of our community. So when I came on as pastor of spiritual formation, it was I had the conversation early March 2020, so right before the pandemic hit. And I remember like 3 days later, it was like, okay, and this is not going to be the job I thought, because what are we doing, And so, but it has been so fun because I think that being a part of the Blackhawk community, I was aware of some of the ways that we were praying that our community would move in. And so to be able to be a part of the creation of some new things that we had been dreaming about for years was really exciting for me.
So you've mentioned having a lot of coffees and other things as part of the job.
Yeah.
I think people outside the church world often wonder, like, what does a pastor do?
What does a pastor do?
On a day-to-day
Totally.
basis. I get that question here at Upper House a lot. What do you do all day?
Yeah. My husband asked me that. What do you do all day? Yeah.
So what does a pastor of spiritual formation do at a church like Blackhawk?
Yeah. So in this role, because it's maybe a little bit of a larger church, I have one of my big roles is I lead a team of incredible people who are thinking about different areas of formation for our church. And so we kind of think of the spiritual formation world as an ecosystem for our church. And so we're watching kind of the different areas. So there's what we do on Sunday mornings, right? That's a huge part of our ecosystem. There's community life, so in what we call community groups. So that's a big part. We have Bible study and courses, which the courses are new that we're doing this year. Is that's our learning arm, where we're helping people to understand Scripture and understand theology in new ways. And then we have kind of a serving component where we're helping to mobilize and get people connected to serving opportunities as another way of them expressing their life with God.
So let's move to that. So the church has a number of ways it's thinking of spiritual formation. How does education fit into that? And I'll let you define education however you want.
Great.
But I think there's you just mentioned service as another role. So service would be, in my mind, sort of distinct from an education setting.
Yep.
And I think what we're trying to understand here in this series is, how do churches play sort of an educational role in the life of so many Christians in their community? So, how do you think about education in the context of formation?
Yeah. I think for us, we have an arm that's kind of dedicated to that. So we have 3 buckets, if you will. So we connect, which is more the community, the relationship aspect. We have learn, which is our courses and our Bible study, and then serve, which is that arm. And so for us, it looks like, how do we help people in our local congregation to move into places that we are recognizing the Spirit moving us in. And so I think, there's the basic education that churches offer, things, Theology 101, how to study the Bible, Introduction to Spiritual Practices, things like this, and which are really important and probably are going to happen in the church more than they might happen elsewhere. But we also have these other areas that we sense that God is moving us in the congregation towards. And so we see the opportunity for us to really concentrate this education in a way that's going to help form people in that direction. And so maybe an example of that. So at Blackhawk in particular, we believe that God is calling us to be a multicultural community. And so some of the so we have to make choices every day that's in all of our different kind of areas of ministry that's going to move us in that direction. And so for us, we are going to have to make the decision to create spaces for people from different cultures and ethnicities to come together intentionally to talk about different topics. Or we're going to provide opportunities for white people to explore their identity, their white identity, if they've never explored that before, and to be able to wrestle with some of those ideas before moving into a multicultural space. And so we're going to have specific deeper dive conversations as to what does it mean for crossing boundaries to be a spiritual practice? Like, how do we do that together as a community? And so that's just one example. But so I think there's those general areas, but then also the particular areas that God's calling a particular local body to grow in.
Right. When you think about these general areas, something like changing a church's culture to be multicultural or something like that. Are you looking to? I'm trying to think of like the way even a curriculum would develop in that. Are you personally reading a bunch of books and then like sort of developing a perspective? Is it? Are there sort of networks of churches that talk about this stuff? Is it consulting a seminary where there might be a scholar of I don't know, multicultural ministry or something like that? Like how's the internal working of developing the? Totally.
Well, it's definitely a collaborative process. And so our team in particular, we have an amazing lead teaching pastor who we work closely with. And we have for this example in particular, right? We have a multicultural team who is learning and who is knocking on other churches' doors to say, hey, how did you do that? Tell us about the early years. There's conferences, networks of churches who are in the trenches doing this kind of work. And so they get together every other year and we go to that conference to say, what are you learning? How do we help our congregation to continue to grow? And we are reading so many books. A lot of us are reading a lot of different books. And so sharing with each other, what are we learning? we do some experiments. And so a few years ago, we did these race and faith learning groups. And so that was our attempt. It's basically a book club, but we put out 10 different books, all having to do with race and ethnicity and the church. And so we said, hey, sign up for these. Let's learn together. Let's grow together. And so for a lot of us, we weren't very much further ahead than our congregation, but we were saying, let's learn together. Let's be on this journey, this process. None of us have arrived, but we think that the learning together part that is an important piece of this as well. So we continue to experiment. We continue to do things, but for the most part, if I'm able to even kind of expand it out, it's a lot of talking with other churches. It's a lot of having conversation amongst ourselves, experimenting, starting with small groups, trying something once and realizing, people said this was going to be a good idea, but we actually don't think this curriculum is really landing. So let's try something different before we expand to the kind of wider church community.
And as people are listening, if it's not clear, Blackhawk's a pretty large church. It has a big staff, so you have like a lot of people to bounce ideas off of, and a lot of opportunities to experiment. I wonder if you could just reflect on what are the benefits and drawbacks of a large church like this, because I think there's both. There's sort of the ability to do certain things. There's also certain challenges when you have thousands of people that you're trying to serve.
Yeah, absolutely. I always talk about, because there's small church challenges and there's big church challenges. And I tell our interns when they're kind of talking about this, I said, you're going to have problems either way. You got to choose what kind of problems you're excited about or willing to help overcome, right? Yeah. So I think, being a large church, things can move slow. And that's hard. There's, if there's thousands of people who are trying to move in a direction, and that's tough. And, as you're leading and you're hearing feedback from different groups of people, you begin to question whether you're doing the right thing. You're thinking about all the different stages of faith and stages of life. And sometimes to try to meet each kind of group where they are, it feels like it can take forever. And I think that is one of the hardest things. You have to have a lot of tenacity. You have to realize things are going to take a long time. You're realizing that you're not going to make everybody happy. And so whether it's something like race or it's something very different, people aren't going to like or agree with the kind of the choice that you're making. Another hard part about Christian education maybe and a big church is that sometimes you can feel like you have to there's a temptation to feel like you have to go lowest common denominator, like low shelf discipleship, because there's always going to be people who are newer in the faith and going to need to learn and not going to be ready for these bigger conversations. And so, it's not a secret that, I've had many conversations of Blackhawkers who've been around for 10 years, 12 years, and they have said, I feel like I've outgrown, and that's, outgrown Blackhawk. And that's a common large church problem. Right. It's not just our problem. It's a common large church problem. And so because what they're saying is, this kind of low shelf discipleship, which is intentional, really great for new believers, young Christians growing in their faith, but you kind of hit a wall. And so what do I do? How do I grow? And so that's a big challenge that our team's excited about and that we're working to overcome. But I would say in small churches, I think, some of the benefits are that you're able to dig in a little deeper. You're able to move a congregation a little faster. You're able to do things a little more intentionally sometimes. And it's easier to get people moving and engaged. And so, So,
I think it's right that you sort of pick your poison.
Yeah, you really do, right? What excites you, and what are you willing to live with for, your careers in ministry? One
challenge, just as someone who's been a part of many large churches, that I noticed too, and it goes right along with what you were saying, which is that a lot of large churches, like the sort of the orientation of the church is toward growth, and sort of the metrics of success are more people coming, are more people sort of becoming members, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so it can lead to what you were talking about, which is an emphasis on sort of the new person, the non-Christian, and bringing them in, which of course I agree with. But it does leave a different type of growth, which might be a growing deeper or sort of a more discipleship model for the people who are already there and have been there.
Absolutely.
And I wonder if that, so you've already identified that tension. Has thinking changed in the last few years on that, just based on COVID? And I know a lot of churches are sort of rethinking basic strategies and things like that.
100%. I mean, right, I think for many of us, small and large church, you kind of saw what happened to your church congregation when COVID hit, right? At first, people were excited to, I mean, in our case, to be online, right, to do church in a new way and, excited to be there for each other and continue to be in small groups and figure that out. But over time, as that kind of the months waned on, we saw a lot of people kind of step away. And we saw that they were stepping away from the Sunday morning church experience. And that's what they thought they were only stepping away from. But then you talk to them later on and just stories after stories of like, actually, I just kind of stopped following Jesus altogether, right? And so they had, for many people, unknowingly, and our church, right, we had substituted a life with God and this their spiritual growth, their spiritual education, Christian education, if you will. We were just kind of all putting it in all of our eggs in kind of one basket. Was the Sunday morning worship experience, teaching, and realizing maybe, as this really tough time was kind of like a pressure cooker in people's lives, we kind of saw maybe the kind of Christ followers we had been forming. And I think for many churches, we kind of was a little wake-up call and pretty determined, I think, many of us on the other side to spend that time digging deeper, helping people in our congregations to really focus on more than just the Sunday experience, but their life with God and being able to talk about some of the things, theology, different things to help them to ground them better. So, and
so that it sounds like that would put sort of the spiritual formation framework sort of more central to what the church is called to do, in the sense that if there's a realization that people aren't being formed the proper way in the old way, then it's the spirit. Is that sort of the spiritual formation is sort of the answer, at least the proposed answer?
I do think so. I do think it's like helping, and I think seeing again like this ecosystem that like the Sunday morning experience is important and it has a place, but it can't hold everything. And so being able to more robustly build these other areas, helping people to see the value of engaging in this way. Oftentimes what our team, spiritual formation, looks like a Monday through Saturday faith, like what happens in between church, when you gather on a Sunday morning. And so that can be tough sometimes, even after COVID, to convince people that it's worth their time and it's worth reordering their whole lives around. But I also think that I think that's okay. I think that the call of Jesus in our lives to be disciples is a hard call sometimes, and so it's a choice that we all have to make of how are we going to be choosing to walk with God, and what are we going to give our mind space to, and our energy and our time. And so, so I think, and it's okay. One of the things that we talked about when we started creating these courses and different things is often with large churches, it's okay, well, you have to have a certain number of people to come to this event to make it worth it, to make it worth our time. But we have totally, that is not our thinking at all. We said if there are some of these courses, if there are 5 people who are showing up to this course because they want to learn how to study the Bible, it is going to be worth our time. And we're going to do it despite, it doesn't matter how many people show up. Like with the people who are showing up, these are the people that we're going to be pouring into, that we're going to be discipling, because we believe that the church isn't just like a come and see kind of orientation, and because that has been a lot of the tractional large church model, but instead I kind of talk about the go and be. Like we are going to be discipling people so that they are out in their workplaces and in their neighborhoods, and they're able to live their life with God in front of people in a way that that makes sense to the people around them. So,
just reminds me of as someone who's a historian and thinks about these things in sort of historian terms. There was a phase, and Blackhawk was a part of this in the 90s and 2000s. It was one of the heights of the church growth movement, which was a certain way of thinking about church to sort of grow the people coming in. And there was a lot done there, but there was a response to that, which was the missional church movement, and the sort of the contrast you just said about like bring people in versus sending people out. Like that was one of the core differences between those two sort of frameworks.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how those frameworks sort of work themselves out in very particular ways in the programming that a church does and where they put emphasis. If they're willing to have a 5-person class versus this must have 100 people for it to be worth our time or whatever. But it's interesting to see how that sort of missional church movement, that was pre-COVID. That was like the 2010s or so, or 2000s, 2010s. But it seems like it sort of is fit for the moment, the sort of post-2020 moment.
Absolutely. And I think for us in particular, we're like, can we do both? I think that's our big, like, can we do both? Like, can we be a place that where people who are not Christ followers are going to feel comfortable, where they're going to be intrigued, where they're going to hear the gospel shared in a way that makes sense to their ordinary, normal lives that aren't church, not in the church world. But at the same time, can we also build disciples? And I think the answer is yes. And I think it, like we said, kind of creates an ecosystem. And so I think maybe in one or both of those models, you kind of different parts of your ecosystem are dying. And so how do you tend all of those parts?
Right.
Can we do it? I don't know. I guess
with each other.
This is the great experiment that many of us are in right now. So
that's right. That's right. So Tiffany, I wonder if you could just talk a bit about how you see what you're doing at Blackhawk in relation to all the other educational options that might be available for someone. Everything from YouTube videos that they can watch about the Bible or something, or about church history or something, to formal seminaries and other things. And I'm sure at a place like Blackhawk, there's people going sort of dabbling in all those different things at different levels. How do you see your work sort of in relation to that spectrum?
Yeah, I do think that probably 85-90% of our church, we probably are the sole place that they are getting Christian education. And so when I say that, it's actually surprising maybe that I haven't maybe had that thought before, but for the most part, we have found that many people in our congregation, right, they're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. Many of them, maybe 40, 50% of them are raising children. Others are we have a large tech company, close by. They're working even more hours than that. And so the amount of free time, if that outside of work and outside of family that people have to give to their own education is slim. And so I feel like we are fighting, for the most part, we're fighting against those other kind of factors to help people to value this. And so, so most of our congregation doesn't have time to engage in a seminary level course. But I mean, we do try to kind of point people in different directions. Bible Project is a big one. They have courses actually that they do, seminary level courses that we encourage people to go after if they want that. But for the most part, I find that people, they're not going to uproot their lives and pay for this great university level or a seminary level education. I am actually really thankful for Upper House because it's been a resource that we've been able to push kind of that 10% to that do want to be challenged in their thinking, that they do want to think about ideas outside of their everyday, maybe what they come across in their everyday life. And so it's been a gift for us to be able to have a resource to be able to push people towards. But I would say in general, we're kind of it.
Yeah, so you're thinking about, when you're thinking about education, it's really like more or less assuming that whatever you say is going to be sort of the totality of what many people. Is there ever, maybe this is just, you do this privately, maybe you don't do it publicly, but I totally agree with you that people are busy, I'm busy, kids, all that kind of stuff. We do know the stats of like how much time people spend on phones, how much time they watch Netflix and other streaming things. And it's like, people make choices about
people make choices.
And those choices often, as we've been talking about, sort of lead to certain habits that form you in certain ways. Is there ever sort of the prophetic edge where you just wish people would spend more time educating themselves?
I mean, to be honest, if I could point the finger at myself, right?
Sure,
I mean, on Sunday mornings, it's so funny. If you have an iPhone, it's actually probably during the Sunday morning church service, if you're attending that, is that you get your report for the week. So we're all like, ding, right during the sermon. We're like, oh, wow, I have spent a lot of time on my phone, right? So, I mean, even for myself, I see this, but, and I actually think that's something we do talk to our congregation about. I think just this maybe a past week or two, right, our one of our teaching pastors, right, saying like, hey, to be honest, if you have 2 hours to like just to scroll on your phone, you have time to get into scripture. You have time to watch a Bible Project video. You have time to read a book. You know, one of the things that we do for each of our sermons is that we have a series resource page where we put kind of some next steps if people want to dig deeper. So a book or a podcast episode or an article to read. And so we do definitely encourage people in that way. But I would say for the most part, those things aren't probably as utilized as much as we wish that they were. But when they are, it's so fun to hear just kind of the conversations that come up in our congregation. But
right. Oh, and this next question might be restating a few things here. But what do you see are the biggest challenges to your work, to educating the congregation? I think we've mentioned sort of time limitations being one, but what else?
I mean, to be honest, I would say busyness is the enemy of our spiritual growth as human beings in America, in an overeducated city. I think that alone, I think, is the hardest thing. We are competing with so many other things for people's time and attention. And it's hard to grow when you even say, okay, great, I have 5 or 10 minutes to get, like, that's not like, like the reflective life. Like we grow when we reflect on our experiences and what we're learning. And when we don't have time in our lives to reflect, I don't actually think that we're growing in our lives with God. And so I do think that that's the biggest one.
Yeah. Well, and that might get to this question: when, if you could snap your fingers and sort of the congregation is sort of embodying a mature, spiritually formed. Yeah. What does that look like? What are you sort of aiming for the knowing that most of us will always fall short of the ideal? But what are you aiming for? Yeah,
I think the church, being the body of Christ, in our real everyday lives where we are spending time with God and spending time with each other, where we are orienting our entire lives around community and around doing good work in the world, but in ways that aren't frantic and in ways that where we can trust that the work that we're doing is enough. Where we're spending time in the evenings with each other, right? Instead of watching Netflix because we're all really tired. We've given all that we can. Serving one another, serving in our communities. I think so much of what I do on our, as I'm trying to help form people into the image of God, it's for the good of our world. It's for the sake of the mission. Like that's actually the point. That's we become more like Christ, not to be better people, but to reflect God to the world. And it's hard to do when we're not spending time with people, slowing down and having that space with one another. And so that would be my dream for our congregation.
I wonder, this is something that's attracted me to some of the spiritual formation literature, is this like fundamental insight. I think of Dallas Willard as someone which is like, you as an individual within a community, like there are things you can do to be more Christ-like. Just that fundamental insight, which I think for a lot of Christians, they either just don't think that. They think there's this unattainable goal and I'm just going to sort of try to muddle through and not really develop. Or maybe some people assume we're just so sinful. There's just like nothing. It's just about sort of asking for forgiveness over and over or something like that. And I think that's what's been appealing to me about this particular way of thinking about formation, thinking about education, is there are things we can do as individuals to, and some of them are learning things, but some of them are actually practices that get us to what your vision is.
My goodness. I mean, right. I think this is about living the abundant life that Jesus promises us. Like I think about, there's a young woman in our congregation. She's a teacher, and just thinking about the way that she shows up in her public school as a public school educator in a way that brings good to her class, that encourages, that like loves, that makes the world a better place, and which is so cliche. But I actually think how exciting that we get as Christ followers to impact the world today, and that the Christian life it's like the most boring part of it maybe is about forgiveness. It's like, what in the world? Like there's so much life to be had and so much good work to be done, not in like a difficult, hard way, but in a way that allows the people around us and ourselves to flourish. And so I hope that as people continue to grow, that they see that vision for where God has for them, what God has for them.
Well, you mentioned something just a few minutes ago about a sort of what you fill your mind with. And I want to talk a bit about this, a little more conceptual, but interested in as sort of a subset of spiritual formation is intellectual formation, sort of the formation of the mind.
Yes.
And I wonder when I say that, the formation of the mind, like what comes to mind? Like what do you think being formed in Christ likeness in your mind is? And just to sort of set the table, I think two things that come to mind obviously for me. One is like a certain set of truth or information, I guess, that could be part of the answer. Another would be sort of like virtues, like humility and curiosity that would sort of, no matter what type of information or knowledge you're looking at, would sort of just be like Christ-like ways of approaching it. So anyway, those are two things.
Great.
But I wonder what comes to mind for you when you think of a mind in the likeness of Christ.
Yeah. It's funny because I grew up in a denomination that really is kind of known for being anti-intellectual, but in my local community was very intellectual. So I remember when I became a Christian, these lay leaders would teach our youth groups these like really fantastic, like theological, just on different topics and helping us to understand kind of the nuances of different views on different things. So when I think about the mind, I think, like you said, truth, like being filled with the knowledge that we have in the Bible, that being able to be good students of the Word and understanding the Bible's not written, to us but for us. So what does that mean? And being able to handle Scripture and to handle different philosophical views, whatever, with maturity and with, like you said, integrity and curiosity and openness and also firmness of mind. Right. So, and it's interesting because even you talking about humility, different things, it's funny because I think for me, I think those maybe being issues of the heart. And so I think for me, when I think about the mind, I think about information, but not just information, but information connected in community. So I think of conversations. I think of learning how to have conversations about things that are hard, being willing to rethink again, right? To have these open minds where we're able to hear what other people think about different things and being sharpened in the way that we're thinking. So, so for us, it looks like, as we're creating courses and Bible study, right? So it's being together in community to be able to learn from an expert, but also to learn from each other. And I think it's not just the information, but it's how we process that information together in community. Right.
Yeah. Community is such an important part. We said that here at Upper House too. That's sort of why we exist. But I think there's often a model out there of like how education happens that's very much like individualistic.
Yes.
Also, in an internet age, it's also like not even about a mentor or a teacher. It's just like I am adopting, sort of grabbing information from the internet, and then I am suddenly knowledgeable about a certain thing. Yep. So I think the community part, I think that's also where like some of the skills that I'm, humility or curiosity or even like basic, I I would be so bold as to say, like, part of being formed in the likeness of Christ is like learning how to listen first before speaking.
Absolutely.
Things like that. Those are only going to be learned in a social setting. Like you can't learn those if you're just sitting at home reading a book. As much as reading books is awesome.
Yeah.
So anyway, the community part really hits for me too. That's education doesn't really happen in the full sense of the word unless you're in community.
Because I think we're communal beings, right? I think our whole lives are lived in community, whether it be community with God or community with others, right? And so, I think that there are people that we probably all know who are very smart people, right? And they have been formed in a certain way with some information, but they're not fun to be around, right? They're smart people who are kind of dumb, like not in a mean way, but just information doesn't necessarily transform us. And so I think, my undergrad was in education, middle school math education. So I have a philosophy of education, right, where knowledge is just one piece of education, right? It's there's so much more involved. Our feelings are involved in education. Our desire and our will is involved in education. And so, because I think we're whole beings, and so I think the intellectual part is a huge part of who we are and important. But sometimes I think it's hard to divide out where the intellectual ends, the life of the mind ends, and something else begins. Yeah,
well, let's go there. I want to ask about, do you have a theology of education or a philosophy of education in this broader spiritual formation context? Like, is there a way you're thinking about it as a pastor?
Yeah.
That you're hoping the people in your church sort of follow.
Yeah. So I think that in the spiritual formation world, we call that the theory of change. And so a lot of pastors have, maybe have thought about that. What's their theory of change? How do people grow? How do people change? How do people transform? And I think this is, and this alone is probably why I'm in this field, because I think that question excites me. Like I've always been curious about that. How do I change? How do I grow? How do other people change? How do other people grow? And I think, but it's also haunted me, right? And so when I think about different people in my life personally that I've loved and that maybe I've been disappointed in their lack of change or lack of growth, or you think about some of these big public leaders, these public moral failures, and you begin, it's not just about the behavior or the failure. Some of us begin to ask the question, okay, so if the Holy Spirit is real in our lives, and if the telos, the end goal is for us to become more and more like Christ, like what if change doesn't happen? What does that mean? Does it mean that we're not walking with God how we thought we were? Does it mean that the Holy Spirit doesn't exist, that this thing is all right? Like you can go dark on this, but so I think that's in some ways where it's haunted me. But I think this question is one that many of us ask at one point or another, whether it be about our own lives or about the organizations or communities that we're in. But I think for me, it's kind of maybe in the spiritual formation world, there's kind of three big parts. So there's So there is the life of the mind, the teaching, what books are we consuming, what information, what, scripture, podcasts we're listening to, teachers that we're sitting under, that really shapes and forms us. I mean, you can look at any area of study and you realize that who you're studying under or what you're studying really shapes who you're becoming. Then there's this other part maybe that I talk about. I don't know how I would say it. Maybe just the idea of practices. So there's these things traditionally, prayer, fasting, solitude, silence. There's so many, but basically it's the idea of how are we embodying the things that we're learning? How are we connecting with God in kind of an interpersonal way? And so I think that's another big piece. And then the third is relationships. And so this can include the people that we're with, our family of origin, all these things kind of shape our inner beings as well. And so I think we as Christians have the opportunity to invite the Holy Spirit, who is the great transformer, into all of those areas of our lives. And I think God works in those areas. And we partner with him in that, but he really does the heavy lifting of that formation. And it's through those avenues that we're changed and transformed. educated, if you will. But I also think it's super mysterious. Like there's so many, depending on who you read, they'll give you different answers. But because I do think there's a mystery to it, and but at least we can point to those factors.
And I think each of those, so sort of the mind, the practices, the relationships, there'd be like different bodies of knowledge, like sociologists versus philosophers versus those, who would sort of emphasize different one of those based on sort of what lens you're looking through. So it's just interesting to think about like those categories break down in some of the ways we talk about the rest of the world too, not just spiritual formation. And I think of even, and they obviously they all connect, right? And that's probably the power of that. I think of, one thinker that's been influential for me in thinking about this is Jamie Smith, who sort of, you are what you love is his thing. And he talks about, everyday liturgies, things that we do, basically habits. Yeah. But calling them liturgies sort of makes you think about them a little harder. Yeah. Like, oh, that's more of a, like I'm putting more value in something if it's a liturgy. Yeah. And how so much of a Christian's life isn't thinking great thoughts about the Trinity or something like that, but it is, what are the things you're doing every day? Yeah. Who are you spending your time worshiping in sort of a general sense? Who are you learning from? Yeah. And these come down to like habits, like just the unthinking things you do every day. So suddenly you're in a world that's much less about the conscious mind and much more about sort of how your body functions. But of course, you can't separate those things either. Right. So,
and it is an interesting thing because I do think our affections and our desires drive so much of our lives. It actually, I think, drives what we give our minds to as well. So I think they go back and forth. I think some people would say your desires affect, one thing or your mind affects another. I think it does seem like it's all interconnected in a mysterious way, but sometimes those, like you said, those liturgies we pay no attention to, and it's in fact those things that are shaping us more than anything else.
Right, and one of Jamie Smith's famous ones is like looking at a football game and comparing it to a worship service, and how like you do a lot of the same things. You stand up, you cheer, you all focus in on sort of the action. And you're in a community, you get these like highs, like emotional highs, all that kind of stuff. And yet we treat one of those as sort of a throwaway entertainment thing. And another one is like a very serious encounter with God. And I think one of the interesting things that this whole sort of conversation moves to is understanding that both of those have the potential to form you as profoundly. Yeah. They might not. I mean, it depends. But that sort of reorients a lot of how you think about what does it mean to live like Christ, right? There's not like these parts of life where you can just sort of check out and say, well, that's just entertainment. It's not really affecting me or something like that. It's a sense that like everything we do is going to sort of be coming into the system and affecting who we are and work on us in that sort of that question, the core question of like, what does it mean or how do people change? Yeah. I think a lot of how people change isn't actually well, it's not necessarily good how you change, and a lot of it is like these things that aren't the conscious things that we decide we are now changing. It's more acted on us.
So I think the challenge in it is to bring those unconscious things to the conscious level, and it takes a lot of energy, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of intention, and we're human beings who get tired, and so I think that's kind of the challenge of maybe being a human being right. and trying to change. But I think in all those things, right, it's like, what is the end goal? Like for a person who doesn't, maybe doesn't have religious beliefs, and they are totally great with becoming a fantastic Packers fan, right? Like that. And it's not a bad, it's like a good, right? It's a part of their community and it's a part of their identity. And so I think as Christ followers, it's, where is our eyes looking? Like, where are we wanting? And it's where are we wanting to go? And is everything in our lives moving us towards that or moving us away from that? And I think that is the big question.
Is there anything specific about Madison, which is a pretty unique, well, it's not that unique, but it's a city, it has a certain culture, big university in town. Does that context at all shape sort of how you think about spiritual formation and education?
Yeah, I think that this is a city who values education. We are a city who is, I think I've read, is one of the most educated cities in America, right? There's a significant portion of us who have master's degrees or above.
I think it's per capita, we're one of the highest in the country,
right. So we value the mind, we value education. And so I think because that's who we are, then we go towards that, right? So we providing these opportunities for growth, these seminars with expert leaders, with expert thinkers, having good conversations, dialogues around important topics. I think that's an easy way to go. I think some of the harder parts to get at are some of those maybe rhythms, and kind of people's everyday lives. If they believe that what they think is what they become, that can be tricky, because that is a part of it, but it's not the whole. So helping people to see that there's more to themselves than kind of being a brain on a stick. And I think we know that intellectually as a community, but sometimes what we know and what we live are different.
Right. In the ecosystem of the Christian world, of Christian education, churches obviously play a really central role. Most Christians somehow encounter a church more often than they would maybe a Christian college or a K through 12 school or campus ministry. How do you see, I guess there's two ways to ask the question. One, how do you see the church in relation to those? Another way to ask it would be, what are you hoping those parts of the ecosystem do to set people up well to be in a church and be formed properly in a church?
Yeah, that's a great question. I do think that there's a lot of things that pastors are trying to do in a church. And so depending on your size, you have more or less bandwidth for different things. And so I think one of the greatest gifts that we have as pastors to a congregation is to walk alongside people as they're walking with God in their everyday lives. And so, I think it's great when we have the opportunity to do things like Sunday school classes or seminars or these courses. And that's very important. And that is our responsibility, I think, as a local church, to be to say who has God given us as a part of this local body, and what do they need to grow. And I think we are primarily responsible for them. And so I do think that is a big part. But I think about all these other entities, right? Because education is one part, but like sometimes, man, my week is walking with people who are grieving the loss of somebody, walking alongside a woman who is being physically abused, right? And how am I helping her to get the resources she needs in order to walk with that? It's people who are kind of just feeling unmotivated, stuck, dealing with mental health kind of challenges. And so that takes up a lot of life as a church, as a pastor. And so what I really value about all of these other entities is that they can focus on something that maybe we can't always give all of our attention to. And so maybe when we're weak in some areas, that they can come in strong and provide some of the most up-to-date research, biblical scholars at these universities, can in these seminaries can stay abreast of all of those things and can help us as pastors to educate our people, but also can be contributing to this greater knowledge of different, kind of the variety of things. And so I think that the church is particular, but I think we have a particular mission to caring for our people and to be on mission in a very particular way, in a particular place. And so sometimes things like, Theology 101 might not make it to the top of our priority list, but we are glad that there are other people who do have that at the top of their priority list that we can point people to and draw on that wisdom.
Yeah, and your mention of the seminary scholars just prompted me to wonder, do you think of education differently when you're thinking about pastors themselves? So is there sort of a different regiment or a different sense of education for pastors as opposed to for sort of the rest of us, the lay people?
That's a good question. Maybe in theory, I wish that I didn't, but perhaps I do. As I think about the responsibilities of a pastor and maybe the high bar of having this knowledge and having the responsibility of wielding it well. I think that I think that pastors should be educated. I think that they should, on a lot of different things, right? Being able to wisely step into the lives of people who aren't thinking about this all the time, who may not be super interested in learning about the Trinity or learning about, it's like they don't care, but But how can we as pastors help them to see where that intersects with their daily lives? And so I get excited when there are lay people who want kind of the quality of a seminary education and through the local church, and I find those people as intellectual peers, and so I welcome that. But I do think that everybody doesn't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's not everybody's gifts, or that's not everybody's focus, and they're focusing on other things in the world that I have no idea about, that I have no education in, and I'm guessing that they wouldn't hold me to that same bar that they have. But I do think for pastors, I think that we have big responsibility, and we need to be wielding that responsibility well.
Yeah. Well, we'll end on this. I wanted to know, what is one of the things in the spiritual formation world that's sort of most on your mind these days? Sort of what's the issue or the most pressing problem that you're confronting in your work?
Yeah. Oh, there's several, but maybe one I would say that I've been thinking about recently, and I think it's important. I don't have a lot of answers for you, Dan, on this, but it's kind of the intersection of spiritual formation and technology. I think that's super interesting. I think that depending who you talk to, there's many people who are in my world who would say technology in the way, when they say technology, they mean smartphone, social media, right, internet,
so digital
technology is what they would mean by that. It's it's the great enemy of formation. So you see many people in my world who get rid of cell phone, right? Like smartphones, but they take the TVs out of their house, which is like great. Like I would say that's totally an option. But also I think that but I don't know if that's the only option, right? So how are we formed? How do those technologies form us spiritually? As the church, how are we asking good questions to help our congregation think about those things? But also maybe even a more interesting one that maybe is coming down the pipe pretty fast is AI, right? So like, what does it mean to be human, and how are these various kind of modes of artificial intelligence going to form us spiritually? I think that's a fascinating question. Maybe a little bit scary, but mostly fascinating, because I don't think we have to be afraid. But I do think that's something I find interesting. And
have you come across the AI sermon generator?
Yes. And so I sit on the teaching team, and so we've been playing around with it of like, okay, write a sermon about such and actually it's like not bad, but it's not good either. Yeah. So it's a good like starting point of some basic things, and then what we realize, there's not a lot of emotion or
right.
or So
right, sort of middle of the road.
Yeah, middle of the road.
I guess that's.
I'm sure some busy, tired pastors are using it.
I'm sure. Yeah. That's a really interesting. I think we've run into the question of technology in a few different conversations in this series related to education, because it's so important to how education is being conducted now. There's digital options for all types of education. Yeah. There's the same questions about smartphones and other things, and how does that shape attention span and learning styles. And I think we're seeing it, the same thing play out in the church, maybe in a slightly different way. Yeah. And I think of, a lot of people we've talked to have been in higher ed, so there's a particular way this is landing on college age students, today. Yeah. Well, thank you, Tiffany.
This has been fun.
Thanks for talking to us about spiritual formation. I love talking about the conceptual and getting some practical as well. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks for joining us. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to subscribe and give us a rating on your favorite podcast app. Also, be sure to check out our upcoming events on upperhouse.org and our other podcast, Upwards, where we dig deeper into the topics our in-house guests are passionate about. With Faith in Mind is supported by the Stephen and Laurel Brown Foundation. It is produced at Upper House in Madison, Wisconsin, hosted by Dan Hummel and John Terrell. Our executive producer and editor is Jesse Koopman. Please follow us on social media with the handle @UpperHouseUW.